Desperate times call for desperate measures. Almost all the books that I've picked up this year so far turned out to be trash, so obviously what I needed to do was pick up something that is completely different from what I usually gravitate towards to break the spell. And what could be more different than Dead Souls by Nikolai Gogol, here in the German translation by Vera Bischitzky. This book has been on my radar for, I don't know, 15, 20 years as one of those big Russian classics that I should really pick up sometime because they're just such classics of world literature. But it was also something that I was never really desperate to pick up because it just sounded so miserable. Dead Souls, like a Crime and Punishment, but more miserable by at least 10 times. But turns out that I was quite wrong in my assumptions, and naturally so, because I didn't actually really have any idea what the book was about. So the book is set sometime in the 1820s. It was written in the 1840s, and it's set somewhere in, I don't know, the southwest of Russia, maybe. Gogol is actually from a small town or village in central Ukraine. Anyhow, it is set in the countryside, and the protagonist, Pavel Ivanovich Chichikov, is traveling from town to town buying up dead souls. And what the dead souls actually are is they are deceased serfs who were bound to the lands of the landowners, who are kept in the tax lists as living people, because the tax lists are only revised about, I don't know, in irregular intervals. So when a serf dies during this interval, he or she will remain registered as alive until the next revision, which might be years in the future. And our protagonist kind of buys the registered names, or he, for all intents and purposes, and according to law, he buys the serfs, who are really just names of dead people. And I don't really know, he intends to, I don't know, enrich himself by some kind of fraud. He intends to commit some kind of fraud with the names of the dead serfs. I don't yet know what he is going to do or intends to do. I kind of don't want to spoil it for myself. I could, of course, look it up on Wikipedia or, I don't know, everywhere. But I kind of don't want to spoil myself about the details. In any case, far from being miserable and dreary, this is actually quite a funny satire. It's about the depravity and corruption of the Russian bureaucracy on the one hand, and the land-owning wealthy class on the other hand. And it's really, really darkly comedic. And it's a really smooth reading experience as well. This is actually a prize-winning new translation by Vera Bischitzky, which was done in 2009. It's one of several new translations of big, well-known Russian classics that have been done in recent decades by German translators. Some of them, I think, either Russian native speakers or bilingual German Russian speakers, and they are also all women. And so this is a far cry from the stuffy, pompous, self-important translations that were done by self-proclaimed scholars in the early 20th century, which were also quite problematic from a perspective of the philosophy of translations. This is very smooth to read, but also doesn't seem to gloss over the strange and alien things about Gogol's language, his use of images, and of course, all the details of everyday life in rural Russia in the 1820s that are so alien to us now. I'm really enjoying reading it, although it can be frustrating at times. I'm only 3 chapters in, 54 pages, but I've also been already frustrated several times by how long-winded Gogol can be, in the way that a lot of authors of his time were. So like when he introduces a new character that will, however, only be there very temporarily, he gives us every little detail about the character's looks, their clothes, their home, everything. And you keep asking yourself, was this really necessary? This 3-page excursion, just, or would we have gotten the point with just, I don't know, a selection of 2 or 3 important points? So it can be a challenge in that way, but it's also a really interesting read, and I'm actually quite hooked and want to know more about this scheme that the protagonist, our anti-hero, is up to. So I've been looking for something quick to read with my morning coffee, for instance, or like between when I come home from work and when I start cooking, when I'm cooling down from my bike ride. And I decided to pick up this again, A Tomb with a View by Peter Russ, which I started reading last autumn. And now it is the season again. The season has come around again. And this is just a collection of stories from and about cemeteries all over Britain, about the people that are buried in the graveyards and descriptions of the graveyards, descriptions of their places in their communities and such. It's just really an assortment of stories that are not really connected, so it's nothing that you would read through in one go, but something that you can pick up and put down again, and not pick up for a year until the season comes down again, and no harm done. And the chapters and sub-chapters are very short, so that's the ideal thing to read with your morning coffee. I'm not a big reader of graphic novels normally. I pretty much, to be honest, can't stand them, avoid them when I can. However, I realized recently that I only have a problem with those that take themselves too seriously. I I actually enjoy the comedic or the lighthearted ones. I love the Asterix comics, for instance. And this is just a fun, well, young adult, I guess, technically. It's about the shenanigans of the boys in a fencing team in a boarding school. A a fancy boarding school, haha, get it? It's actually a really fancy school, and the protagonist, at least of the first volume, is pretty much the underdog. He is the scholarship student, the poor one who gets the scholarship to the fancy fencing school and has to prove himself there. And I think there's also going to be a romance. And as you can see, it's pretty much just cute fun. There's there are all the boys of the fencing team, the established team that our protagonist is trying to enter. It's a really miserable dark day outside, and it's after 4 o'clock now, and I feel like I haven't even really woken up yet. However, I did make some progress in Dead Souls. I'm 126 pages in, which is more or less a third, or at least 1/3 of the first part, or the first part, first volume. I'm not really sure. The second volume is fragmentary. There's only 4 chapters in the second volume, the second part, and it's not even really clear which order they were supposed to be in the original. So I'm not even sure if I'm going to read the second part. If the first part ends a in a satisfying way, makes for a good ending, then I might just leave it at that. So I may have actually read 1/3 already of Dead Souls, and so far it's really funny. It's one absurd scene after the other. Our protagonist Chichikov is still trying to get dead souls, so buy or in some other way obtain the names of peasants who have died from their landlords. And he's sometimes more successful at it, sometimes less. And it's really so unexpectedly funny, and it's also, of course, so interesting to see this very alien world of rural Russia at the beginning of the 19th century. Really, really enjoying it. So glad I've picked it up. So glad I really unexpectedly learned what it is really about, and that it is not, in fact, just doom and gloom and all the misery that you think of when you hear the title Dead Souls. And now that I have complained, it is actually getting a little bit lighter outside, almost sunny even. And I hope that the weather stays stable for long enough that I can actually go outside for a few minutes later and maybe go for a little run just around the block to get my heart rate up a little and shake out my legs, which are rather stiff from all the sitting around and reading that I've done this weekend. Okay, I've just come home from a very tiny run. I'm horribly out of shape and have to get very slowly back into it. Back in April, I actually broke a bone in my foot, so was unable to run for about 2 months. And then during the summer, I just got out of the habit because I started cycling to work, and so I cycle between 16 and 25 kilometers each day. And then during the weekend, on the weekends, I always went hiking and or swimming and cycling. And so that was quite enough, especially with the hot temperatures. But now that it's slowly getting colder, I'm going to try and get back into a running habit. Of course, earlier, after it had been raining all day, the sun came out and was just burning down on me. I usually only go running when the sun is already down. But that is easier to do, I think, in the winter when it gets dark early anyway, and we have long evenings. But in the summer, when the sun finally sets, I'm ready to set as well, and it's harder to motivate myself to running, especially to go running, especially when I'm out of the habit anyway. But anyhow, I'm now going to make some. First of all, I'm going to take a shower, and then I'm going to make some delicious food for tonight and tomorrow for lunch. And then I'm going to pick a new book, I think, because I am enjoying Dead Souls. And by the way, I'm also enjoying this rather devious looking guy here on the cover. But I've already read 50 pages of it today, and that's quite enough for me. And it's not the book that I want to take into bed with me tonight.